UFC 304 betting and DraftKings show. We have 14 fights scheduled for this weekend in London. We have $200,000 to first place on DraftKings. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. And we're going to kick things off in the women's strawweight division as Shauna Bannon comes in as a minus 165 favorite. The comeback on Alice Ardaline is plus 145. And this one is a very low-level fight to start off the card. We have Shauna Bannon, who recently made her UFC debut against Bruna Brazil, and she ended up losing an uninspiring decision there. Bruna Brazil is also fighting later on this fight card, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But in terms of Bannon, I just think she's a very low-level prospect, still relatively green, super hittable on the feet. She'll mix in the leg kicks. She can maybe try to mix in a takedown here or there, but I don't think her wrestling is very good. I don't think her striking is very good. Personally, I'm not even that confident she belongs on the UFC roster. Now, she's being billed as a pretty sizable favorite here, so you look at the other side of the matchup, and Ardaline is coming in on short notice. She doesn't have a great record. She is basically a regional grinder. She fights out of Romania, and she's faced a pretty low level of competition outside of two early fights on the regional scene. She actually fought Zhang Weili and she fought Diana Belbitsa, and she was submitted and pretty much dominated by both of them. So it seems like she's the type of fighter that whenever she starts to get a step up in competition, she hasn't been up to the task, so to speak, but her striking is actually pretty solid. You know, I was actually surprised. I expected to see a total bum when I went back and watched the tape on her, and I actually think she's going to be very competitive in this fight because in terms of the striking, I expect her to be throwing more volume, and even though it's not super clean and technical, I think she throws with more power, and she's not afraid to, you know, get inside and throw 7-8 piece combinations, which I think has the potential to maybe, you know, fluster Bannon or potentially even hurt Bannon. We saw Bannon stumbled a couple times in her UFC debut. I think this girl hits harder. She's going to throw more. And I don't really think Bannon has the grappling chops to take advantage of Ardaline's biggest weakness. I actually think Ardaline might be able to land like a judo takedown or something like that. So this is one where it's a low-level fight, but I think it's going to be super competitive. So I'm going to lean with the underdog here, even on short notice. We'll say Ardaline gets it done by decision. In terms of DraftKings on a 14-fight slate, there's just better fights to target up and down the card this week. And next fight up in the heavyweight division, we have Mick Parkin, a sizable favorite at minus 285, getting the home crowd pop here in London. He's a big favorite. We got Lucas Brzezinski on the comeback at plus 230. And this is one where I could see a case for Brzezinski as a live underdog here, but I'm honestly not super enthusiastic about it. I think on the feet, it is going to be competitive. I actually think Brzezinski might push more of a pace on the feet in terms of the volume, but I don't trust the cardio. It's looked very spotty at times. Other times it's looked a little bit better, but I don't think it's something you could really rely on. And what you can rely on is the fact that his defensive grappling is really just no good. He defends takedowns at under 50%. Yes, a lot of those came against pretty solid wrestlers, but I just think his takedown defense is no good. And then once he's taken down, he generally is not great about working back to his feet. So this is one that I expect to be competitive on the feet. I think Parkin, you know, he can pump that jab, mix in the leg kicks, but I think he's going to need to go to the takedowns here, and I think they'll be there in this matchup. So I'm going to side with Parkin. I don't like the price tag here, but I do think he ends up winning an uninspiring decision. We'll say it's Parkin by decision as the official pick. Next fight up, we have Sam Patterson, a minus 425 favorite. Now the comeback on Kiefer Crosby is plus 330, and we'll start on the Patterson side. He seems to have found a new home at the 170-pound division. He was huge for 155. Clearly his body is more comfortable at 170, and he looked pretty good in his welterweight debut against Johan Lainez. He ended up winning by submission inside the first round, and I actually think that's going to be his path to victory here, because that's the biggest advantage in this fight is he's facing somebody in Kiefer Crosby that is going to swing with power on the feet. His striking is pretty solid, and that's the one knock on Patterson. He's got that tall man defense, leaves his chin way up in the air, doesn't really play defense, and he has been clipped multiple times. So we know the durability is a concern for Patterson. He can get rocked early in this fight, but the grappling advantage for him against Kiefer Crosby is so massive. I think if he goes to it, it's going to be clear as day that Patterson is going to be able to cut through him on the mat and eventually find another submission here. So we're going to say it's Patterson by submission, that's the official pick. But I'm going to want exposure to both sides on DraftKings, because if Crosby does pull off the upset, it's likely coming by a first-round knockout, which will break the slate at his price. Next up in the flyweight division, this is potentially a contenders fight. The winner is likely to get a title shot here. We have Muhammad Mokaev, the undefeated prospect here at 12-0. He's currently a -148 favorite. The comeback on Manel Kopp is +124. And we'll start on the Mokaev side. I mentioned the undefeated record, but honestly, I think this guy is like pretty ripe in terms of getting that first L handed to him for a couple reasons. For starters, you know, he's got excellent wrestling. He's relentless with the takedowns. He's capable of controlling his opponents, but usually only if he gets to the back. If he doesn't have that back control or those back takes, then he generally lets his opponents work back to their feet. Now, he's usually still clinging on to them and really just begging to control them, but he's not doing a ton of damage. And that's the downfall with a guy like Mokaev, is even though you have the relentless wrestling pace, he's not really, like, he's not putting a stamp on these rounds because he's not getting off on damage. So if he's not going to submit you and find a finish, there's really thin margins for him to be able to give up these rounds. And we saw that, you know, multiple times in his UFC run here. Rafael Filho, you know, nearly exposed this guy years ago. He's dropped rounds to fighters much worse than Manel Kopp in the past. And I think Kopp has the skill set to give him fits. We even saw it in his last fight against Alex Perez, and a reason why I thought Perez was live in that spot was because Perez is a good defensive wrestler, and he's a much better striker. And what we've seen against Mokaev is that anytime you force him to fight at space, his striking is no good, and his defense is no good, and he generally gets hurt in a lot of those striking exchanges because he is outmatched on the feet. Now, where Perez didn't come through is that he was able to play defense really exceptionally throughout that fight. The difference is, and the reason why Mokaev won, is because just because you're playing defense, that's great, but you're not winning rounds unless you're actually producing offense. And that's something that Perez failed to do. A lot of those rounds, pretty much every round, was winnable for him had he just, be a little bit more assertive in some of those positions, like land a little bit more offense to make it clear, especially if you're getting held against the fence for multiple minutes around. So I think it was a very winnable fight for Perez. I think this is a very winnable matchup for Manel Kopp, a guy that's one of the most explosive strikers in the flyweight division. 11 of his 19 wins have come by knockout. He's also got a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'd expect him not to be lost in those grappling exchanges as well. And Mokaev's not that guy for me. And Manel Kopp, I think he's got the skill set here. The only concern with Kopp is he's coming off that rib injury. He pulled out of it was supposed to be a main event back in April against Mateus Nicolau. He ended up fracturing some cartilage in his rib. So it is kind of a quick turnaround from that surgery, but I'm assuming he's fully healthy here. That's the way I'm going to treat it. And if that's the case, I think he should be a small favorite in this fight and not the other way around. So we're going Manel Kopp by decision. That's the official pick. Next up, we have a fun matchup in the welterweight division as Preston Parsons comes in as a small favorite at -130. The comeback on Oban Elliott is +110. And I kind of think these guys are similar versions of each other. Parsons, primarily a grappler. He averages over 4 takedowns per 15 minutes. And on the feet, he's got a little bit of power, but he's pretty slow, and he's very hittable in striking exchanges as well, so that's not great. In terms of Oban Elliott, he's kind of the same thing. He's looking to grapple in a lot of his fights, but he's not a great wrestler. He struggles to control guys. I actually think Parsons is going to be a little bit better in those wrestling exchanges, and I think he's the better submission grappler as well. And then when it comes to the striking, I think both guys are hittable on the feet. I think both guys can be hurt at times on the feet as well. I just slightly favor the cardio of Preston Parsons. Not that he's some sort of cardio warrior, but I think Elliott has struggled to keep up that pace in more fights than Parsons. So in a fight that I think is going to be close and competitive, there's just multiple attributes that I slightly favor Parsons on. So for that reason, I'm going to expect him to get the job done here. We're saying Parsons by decision. That's the official pick. And next fight up in the light heavyweight division is a fight that I don't have much interest in at all. We have Modestas Bukauskas, a -155 favorite. The comeback on Marcin Prachniow is +130. And Bukauskas is somebody that, honestly, I've never been a huge fan of his skill set. I think for the most part, he's okay in multiple areas, but he doesn't really have a ton of upside, especially when he's being billed as a betting favorite, which I disagree with, because Bukauskas is somebody that, 9 of his 15 wins have come by knockout, but most of them came on the regional scene. At the UFC level, he hasn't really shown much power at all, because most of his striking is just harmless kicks from the outside, pumping his jab. He's never going to look to grapple, and I think he's very hittable in those striking exchanges as well. I don't trust his durability. This is a guy that's been knocked out 4 times in his career. I would expect a lot of people to point to the durability issues of Marcin Prachniow here, but Bukauskas is arguably just as unable to take a punch as Prachniow is. And then on the Prachniow side, he's primarily a kickboxer. I just think he's a little bit better at it than Bukauskas. I'd expect him to throw more volume, land more of those kicks, and yes, the durability is a concern, but it's probably equal on the Bukauskas side, and Bukauskas is the side that's laying juice. So I'm going to side with the underdog here, Marcin Prachniow. I just think there's better fights to target up and down the card. We'll say Prachniow by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the bantamweight division, we have Callan Loughran, a minus 205 favorite. The comeback on Jake Hadley is plus 170. And we'll start on the Loughran side. He's a 9-1 prospect fighting out of Ireland. Of course, he's facing Jake Hadley, who could have the home crown narrative in front of him, but Hadley's moving up from 125 pounds. He was always really big for that division, but honestly at 135, I struggle to see him have a ton of success, especially in a matchup like this, because while Hadley is a solid boxer, fights out of the southpaw stance, he can blast those kicks as well, he can never defend takedowns. He defends takedowns at under 50%, and a lot of times it's because he's just super confident in his grappling ability. But if you watch some of those exchanges, if he's not pulling off these low probability submissions, then he's giving up minutes. He's giving up control time. He's fighting off his back, stuff that you don't want to see in terms of backing somebody. And then on the Loughran side, this is a guy that packs a punch for his size. He's very difficult to submit. He's got that blockhead, kind of build, which I think is going to be difficult for Hadley to snatch up a neck because he doesn't really have one. And then in terms of the wrestling, we could expect him to go for it. He averages over 2 takedowns per 15 minutes. I think the wrestling will be there. And I think when those takedowns come, the control time, the ground and pound is going to be there as well. So we're going Loughran by decision. That's the official pick. Next up, we got my girl Molly Meatball McCann. She's a minus 360 favorite. The comeback on Bruna Brazil is plus 285. And I think this is a clear setup fight for my girl Molly McCann here. They love booking her in front of her home crowd. She feeds off the energy of the crowd, and she always puts on a show. Now, they love setting up these fights where she's able to put on a show, because nobody wants to watch Molly McCann face somebody like Erin Blanchfield. It's no surprise what's going to happen in that type of matchup. But when she gets these kind of softball matchups, she delivers just about every time, and usually in entertaining fashion. And for DraftKings, usually puts up a decent score as well. This is one where on the feet, I just expect her to be landing the much bigger shots here. Molly McCann is a very powerful boxer. She wants to get inside, fight inside the phone booth, and land those big combinations. And then she's also shown she's capable of mixing in the grappling. That's something that she's clearly worked on over the last couple years. We saw her submit Deanna Belbitsa in the first round, her last time out. So she's making improvements on the ground as well. And I just think she wins this fight wherever it goes, because Bruna Brazil, despite having the kickboxing pedigree, her striking is really not all that great. Unless she's able to land like a big powerful head kick or something like that, I just don't see a way that she can win this fight, because on defense, she's very hittable, and this is a girl that does not react well to being hit. She gets hurt in a ton of fights. She's been knocked out 3 times in her young career, and I already mentioned the power advantage for Molly McCann. I would not be surprised if Molly was able to hurt her in one of these exchanges. And I know some people are looking at overs in this fight. Women's fight, lower division, generally does see the judges' scorecards, and I guess I slightly lean with the decision, but I would not be betting that, because I think Molly is somebody that, like I said, always wants to put on a show for the fans, and even if there's 20 seconds left in the fight, she's going to be emptying the tank searching for a finish here. So I wouldn't rule out a finish. Either way, I think Molly's a pretty decent target on DraftKings. We'll say McCann by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the featherweight division, we have Nathaniel Wood, a minus 425 favorite. The comeback on Daniel Pineda is plus 330. And one of my favorite betting angles of the card is to look for a finish from Nathaniel Wood in rounds 2 or round 3, and just a finish in general, because Daniel Pineda, he's getting older now. He's busted for PEDs multiple times in his career, and we know his cardio has just never been good. It's not going to get better at the end of his career. It's just simply not going to happen. Now, what he does have on the feet, he's got some sharp leg kicks, and he's got an opportunistic submission game. But if he's unable to hurt Wood early or pull off an early sub, I would expect him to get finished here. Nathaniel Wood is somebody that I've always kind of put a lot of stock into, despite his ability to constantly get hurt in a lot of his fights, and that has cost him multiple times. He's been knocked out multiple times. He lost the Naimov fight because he kept getting rocked and hurt in that fight, but he's a very skilled fighter. Solid jab, mix in the leg kicks, always keeps up a high pace on the feet, and he's a good grappler in his own right, and he's capable of landing takedowns as well. This is one where I just think he's really going to dominate Daniel Pineda down the stretch, and I think Pineda is going to end up looking for a way out. Wood by submission. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Arnold Allen, a minus 245 favorite. The comeback on Giga Chikadze is plus 200. And I'm going to side with Allen in this fight. I just think, he's had a tough matchmaking over his last 2 fights. The knock on Allen was constantly throughout his career. He was on this big winning streak, and people were like, well, he's facing the lower tiers. Give him a step up. Give him a step up. Well, now he got back-to-back step-ups with a Max Holloway loss and a Movsar Evloev loss. But even in those losses, he did have moments at times and honestly fought better than I expected him to fight in those spots. And now I think this is a spot for him to get a rebound here against Giga Chikadze, who is very one-dimensional. Giga comes from that high-level glory kickboxing background. He's got his infamous Giga kick that he'll look for constantly, and Chikadze has proven that if you're going to stand and try to fight with him at range, that's generally the hardest way to beat him in these fights. What you need to do is get inside, make it dirty, fight in the phone booth, and mix in the grappling. And because Chikadze has shown he can't really defend takedowns, and he's not a good defensive grappler whatsoever. So this is one where I think initially Allen might struggle while the fight plays out at range, but eventually I think he finds his way inside and really just dominates up close in those clinch situations. And I do think he's going to probably mix in some grappling here as well to get his hand raised. So we'll say Allen by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the middleweight division, we have Christian Leroy Duncan, a minus 142 favorite. The comeback on Gregory Rodriguez is plus 120. And we'll start on the CLD side. He's going to be fighting in front of his home crowd. I expect him to want to put on a performance for the fans. He's a very fast striker, and he does have power in his hands. But the knock on him is that at times he doesn't put a ton of volume out there. He's somebody that kind of is very patient, and then once he goes quick and he goes hard. He'll look for those flying knees at just about every opportunity if given the chance. And he also, isn't a terrible wrestler, even though he rarely goes to it. And on the flip side, Gregory Rodriguez, I think, is very similar to CLD in some aspects. He certainly wants to put on a fight for the fans, very exciting fighting style, but he's generally a kill or be killed type of fighter. While he does have power on the feet, he's a good grappler, holds a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but as you know, he doesn't go to it as often as he should. And that's really bit him in the past because he just wants to swing and bang with some fighters that are capable of finding the chin. And that's the knock on him, is the durability. He's been knocked out multiple times in his career. And I think in a matchup like this, if he doesn't go to the grappling, it could potentially happen again here. So I'm going to slightly favor Duncan here to get the knockout. But in terms of DraftKings, I think it's a really good fight to target. And it's one that I'm going to want exposure to both sides this weekend. Which brings us to our featured bout on the main card. We have Paddy Pimblett taking on King Green, formerly known as Bobby King Green. He now legally changed his name to King, so that's how we'll be referring to him for the rest of this breakdown. We'll start on the King side. We know what he brings to the table. He's a very good boxer. He wants to fight in boxing range with his hands down and really just using that speed to his advantage. And even at this stage in his career, he's not a spring chicken by any stretch, but he's very good boxer. The speed is still certainly there. And I would expect him to have a ton of success with that jab, because that's one thing that I think is going to give somebody like Pimblett a ton of issues, because Paddy, while his striking has improved, and I do think he probably has more power in this fight, I think in terms of the technicality and the striking defense, that's where he's really going to struggle, because even in previous fights, like just about every one of them, it seems like the jab has given him issues. Even in his last fight against Tony Ferguson, he was landing clean, landing flush with that jab. I could just see King Green repeatedly jabbing up the face of Pimblett here, giving him issues when he tries to close distance. I also think Paddy is not going to be able to have any type of grappling success here, with the exception of, just a weird exchange or a knockdown, some weird thing happening to where he's able to end up in top position. Then I think he could have success there. But I just think I don't see him getting the fight there through a technicality. Like, I don't think he has good enough wrestling to process takedown Green here, and I don't think he has the cardio to really be competitive in round 3, and this is a fight that goes the distance, that's favored to go the distance, so it's one where I think Green has multiple advantages here. I don't trust the cardio. I think the striking defense, I think the jab of King Green, I'll say it again, that's going to be the biggest difference maker in this fight, and I think that's why he's going to be able to get it done even in enemy territory, so to speak. So we'll say it's King Green by decision. That's the official pick. And next fight up, we have the co-main event. This one's for the heavyweight strap. We have Tom Aspinall, a minus 375 favorite. The comeback on Curtis Blades is plus 295. Now, for starters, obviously the betting line is wide here. The first time these guys fought, not that long ago, Tom Aspinall closed as a minus 140 favorite. That was the fight where he blew out his knee in 15 seconds. So we really don't have anything to take away from that fight. But in terms of how the market has changed their view on this fight, now he's this massive favorite, and I really don't think much has changed from the first fight, because Curtis Blades, for my money, is still the best wrestler in the division, very aggressive with his wrestling pace, and he trains at elevation. He's got great cardio. We know he can go 25 minutes if he needs to, and I would expect that to be a big advantage for him in this fight if it were to get extended, because I don't think Aspinall has great cardio. He's never fought into round 3 his entire career, and the times where he's even been forced to fight in round 2, he seemed to be a little bit weathered in terms of the gas tank. So this is one where I think Blades right off the bat could have a couple advantages, the wrestling, the cardio. Where Blades is a worry is his durability, because this dude thinks he's a professional boxer, and in multiple fights where it's like, dude, just go to your wrestling, he wants to stand and trade with these super powerful guys that ultimately end up finding the chin and really putting his lights out. So he's been knocked out in all 4 of his career losses, and I think more times than not, Aspinall, he's a great boxer. That 1-2 is going to be super fast, and I would expect him to be able to hurt Blades if he lands clean. And I think more times than not, that's probably the most likely outcome, is an Aspinall knockout in round 1. But I don't think it happens nearly as often as this betting line indicates. And I think for DraftKings, regardless of who wins, the winner of this fight is going to score very well. So I would want exposure to it potentially in all of your lineups this weekend. And I just think if Blades can somehow survive that first round, then he's going to be super live and potentially look like the favorite outside of that first round. So the official pick is going to be Aspinall by knockout in round 1. But in terms of where the value is, I think it's clearly on the Blades side, and potentially even a Blades finish in rounds 2, 3, 4, or 5 if it were to get that far. So that's the way that I'm going to end up playing it in terms of DraftKings and the betting market. We'll see what happens on Saturday. Which brings us to our main event. This one's for the welterweight title. We have Leon Edwards, a minus 258 favorite, with Bilal, remember the name, Muhammad, at plus 210 on the comeback. And this is another rematch. With the co-main was a rematch. This one's a rematch as well from a couple years ago. These two fought, and Edwards clearly won the first round, kind of wobbled Bilal a little bit with the head kick, and clearly won the first round. But as soon as the second round started, one of the nastiest eye pokes, the fight was called off. It's a no contest due to an eye poke, and it was a very serious eye poke. Now they're running it back. This one's for the title, and I think this is tough, because I do think Edwards is the more technical striker. I do think he probably wins here with the home crowd narrative in what should be a pretty competitive fight. But I think it's clear that the value is on Belal Muhammad here, and I do consider him a live dog in this matchup because despite some of the technical advantages for Leon Edwards, what Edwards doesn't ever do is put a ton of activity out there, so he's typically a thin margins type of fighter, and he's shown he can be taken down and out-grappled at times as well. So what Belal Muhammad brings to the table, right off the bat, he's got excellent cardio. We know he can push a pace for 25 minutes, and I would expect this fight to hit the judges' scorecards at a pretty high clip. So there's one notch in the hat of Belal Muhammad. Muhammad also fights with a very high fight IQ, very matchup-based fighter. You know, when he's fighting people where he's going to have a big grappling edge, he's, instantly on their legs, shooting double legs, grappling. When he thinks he can have a striking edge, he's keeping the feet upright. He's a very smart fighter in terms of how to game plan for his opponents. And I think this is one where it's just an overcorrection based on how that first round played out. And I think if that fight goes 25 minutes, it looks pretty different, and I think that's what we're going to see on Saturday. So it's one that I think is going to be super close, and it probably comes down to just one round. That's how close I think this fight is going to be scored at. So I think the value is going to be on Belal Muhammad. The official pick in terms of giving a pick is going to be Edwards by decision, but don't be surprised if I have some sort of Muhammad action on DraftKings or potentially even a bet come this weekend. And as always, guys, fightnumbers.com will have my DraftKings player rankings. It'll have my ownership projections as well. We have the live odds screen that will be updated in real time during UFC 304. That's part of our betting package, which includes picks from Evan, Ozzy, and Pepe as well, some of the best guys in the industry. There's a ton of other tools and resources up at fightnumbers.com, and for this week alone, use promo code 304 at checkout for 30.4% off your first payment. As always, appreciate you guys watching. Best of luck, and we'll see you next week.